All right, welcome back to The Explainer. If you've got your PCI Level 1 or 2 exams coming up, you're in exactly the right place. We're going to jump right back into the TM-101 manual, picking up where we left off, and really nail down these critical steps of tensioning and elongation. So here's how we're going to break it down. Basically, just like you'd do it out in the plant. We're starting with that initial setup, then we'll get into the actual measurement, run the numbers, and finally, and this is super important, we'll talk about the real-world corrections you have to make. All right, let's dive in. Okay, before we even think about the numbers, let's just take a second to talk about why this is so critical. The stakes are really, really high here. This precision we're talking about, it's not just about passing your exam. It is absolutely non-negotiable for safety and quality on every single product that leaves the plant. I mean, this is the very foundation of what we do in precast. All right, so first things first, we're jumping into section 5.3.9, and this is all about setting that perfect baseline. You got to remember, if you get this initial tensioning wrong, every single measurement you take after this is going to be off. It's a domino effect. So the big question is, how much force do you actually need? Just enough to get the slack out, but not so much that you start stretching the strand. And you can pretty much bet you'll see a question about this on your exam. The manual gives us a super specific range, and you really need to have these numbers locked in. And here it is, the magic window, between 5 and 25% of the final force. Think of it like the Goldilocks zone. Not too little, not too much. Why this range? Well, that 5% minimum makes sure your dead-end chucks are seated tight and all the slack is gone. And staying under 25% means you still got plenty of stretch left to measure accurately. Okay, now pay attention here, because this is one of those details that trips a lot of people up on the test. The tolerance for your initial force isn't just one number, it actually changes. See this? If your initial force is 10% or less of the final, you've got a really tight tolerance, plus or minus just 100 pounds. But if you go over that 10%, you get a little more wiggle room, plus or minus 200 pounds. You got to know that difference. Okay, so once you've nailed that initial tension, it's time to actually measure the elongation. We're moving on to section 5.3.10. This is the core procedure, the hands-on part of the job. You've got to know these steps like the back of your hand. And here they are. This whole process, this is the heart of the operation. You need to be able to walk through this in your sleep for the exam, but I want you to look really closely at step 4. This is a huge safety point. You never, ever take that measurement while the jack is under full pressure. You wait until the force is released from the jack and the live end chuck is holding everything securely. Then you measure. So how precise do you need to be? 1/4 inch. That's the number to burn into your brain. Your elongation measurement and recording have to be to the nearest 1/4 inch. And why? Because that little measurement is how you double check that you have the right force in the strand. Now, yeah, for really short beds, you might go down to 1/8 inch, but for the exam and for general practice, 1/4 inch is the standard. Okay, so you've got your measurement from the bed. Now what? Well, now you have to see if it matches what the math says it should be. And for that, we turn to section 5.3.11, which gives us the formula. And yep, you guessed it, you absolutely have to know this formula. And there she is, the basic elongation formula. Now, I know formulas can look a little intimidating, but don't let it fool you. It's really just a simple relationship between force, length, and the physical properties of the strand itself. Let's break down what each of these letters actually means. All right, here are the pieces of the puzzle. L is your strand length, chuck to chuck. A and E, the area and modulus of elasticity, you get those right from the mill report. But P, okay, listen up. I want you to star this, highlight it, whatever you have to do. P is not the final force. It's the difference between the final force and the initial force. That is such a common mistake on the exam. Don't let that be you. And, the whole reason this formula even works is because of a concept called the elastic range. We are only stretching the steel. We're not permanently damaging it. And that's where this number comes in, 80%. Your jacking force is limited to 80% of the strand's ultimate strength. That's another critical safety and quality number you just have to know. It's what keeps us in that predictable, elastic zone. So that formula, it's perfect in a perfect world. But you and I know the plant floor is not a perfect world, right? We have to account for real-world stuff that messes with our measurements. And this is where we get into some more advanced level 2 type knowledge. These are the corrections. And these are the big four you're going to need to know about: chuck seating, form shortening, abutment movement, and thermal effects. The basic formula gets you in the ballpark, but applying these corrections, that's what gives you the actual accurate result. So let's take a quick look at each one. Okay, chuck seating. This one's super important, especially for level 2. The key thing to remember is that it works differently at each end of the bed. The dead-end chuck seats during tensioning, which actually adds to the elongation you measure, but the live-end chuck seats when you transfer the load off the jack, and that causes a loss of elongation. They go in opposite directions. Next up, form shortening and abutment movement. Put simply, the giant thing you're pulling against, it's not a perfectly solid rock. It moves a little. The form might compress a tiny bit, or the abutment might rotate just slightly under all that force. That movement reduces the tension in the strand, so you have to factor it in. And then there's temperature. This one can be a big deal. Imagine you're pulling a hot strand on a summer day, and you're going to pour cooler concrete around it. As that strand cools, it's going to contract and actually gain force. So here's the rule of thumb you need for the exam. You adjust your elongation by 1% for every 10-degree Fahrenheit difference. But you only do it if the total temperature swing is going to be more than 25 degrees. This all leads to a really fundamental concept: gross versus net elongation. Think of it this way. Gross is what you calculate. It's the theoretical target, everything you need before any of those real-world losses happen. Net is what you physically measure on the bed. It's the final actual stretch you have after all those losses have taken their bite. You calculate for gross, you measure for net. So that brings us to the final and maybe most important question. Which of these corrections matters most? Well, the answer is, it depends on your plant. And that's really the big takeaway here. Knowing all this theory, that'll get you through the exam, but understanding how to apply it to your specific beds, your forms, your equipment, that's what makes you a truly great PCI certified technician. Thanks for watching The Explainer.